Rick Ross is an extremely successful rapper with billions of streams on his music, a multitude of platinum and gold songs, and a ton of chart-topping singles and albums. But despite him being loved by so many in the industry, a lot of fans seem to hate him for a variety of reasons. Whether it be extremely controversial lyrics or his very controversial background, a lot of people do not like Ricky Rose. And this raises a question: why, despite all of his relationships and success in the music industry, does Rick Ross get so much hate nowadays from the fans? Well, let's look into it. Also, sorry if I smell bad and look sweaty. I just got back from the gym, so I hope you guys don't worry about that too much. Rick Ross has put together and built up his career in the music industry for nearly 20 years. In this time, he's been able to rack up a ton of accolades that many artists dream of. But like I said, recently it seems like he's been getting a ton of hate. I even did a poll on my channel and nearly 50% of people said they didn't like him, for a variety of reasons that I'm going to cover. Of course, Rick Ross has a ton of accomplishments. For example, he has recorded platinum albums, made his own line of alcohol, collaborated with some of the biggest names in hip-hop, and that's just to name a few. However, like many people who are famous and in the music industry, you're going to run into some controversy. Except in Rick Ross's case, he's been in quite a bit of it. It all started on January 28th of 1976 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where Mr. Rose was born. He didn't live there very long though, as his family eventually moved to Carroll City. This move was a huge change for Ricky and a factor in influencing what became his Rick Ross persona. He also mentions his love for the show Miami Vice, which glorified the environment and lifestyle around him, leading him further into the character he is today. While the lifestyle may have had some influence on Ross, he still generally kept to himself and stayed out of trouble, not actually living the life he adored. However, with some of his lyrics, you may think he did a lot of the stuff he was influenced by. Like on the song I'm So Hood, where he says, "Snitching ain't gonna cut no time, I'll murder one of you, rob you for your last, then off come the mask." But instead, Rick Ross decided to work at a car wash. At this car wash, Rick Ross talked about always seeing expensive cars pull through, and he noticed there was a variety in who was driving them. Sometimes it would be massively successful business people pulling through, and other times it would be massively successful drug dealers. Now, I don't know if this is some crazy success story that he just wrote to make himself sound cool, but it could have influenced his career choice. And he also eventually made his own car wash product, so maybe he's just passionate about it. However, he wanted the lifestyle that came with the fancy cars, and he saw multiple ways of getting there. So what he decided to do was to combine a little bit of both, using the drug dealer lifestyle as his music persona and the businessman guiding his financial moves. But he was far from starting his rap career. After washing cars as a kid, he went on a stint in college where he received a football scholarship at Albany State University. To some, this could be a surprise because, again, the way he raps, you may not expect him to have gone to college or wanted to go to college. And to be fair, he did drop out after just a year. But what he was going to college for was very shocking to a bunch of fans. Rick Ross, the self-personified drug kingpin, was going to school looking to graduate with a degree in none other than criminal justice. So obviously this is a little bit strange based on what he raps about, but what he did next was far more controversial. After dropping out of college, Ricky Rose went to work at a South Florida prison as a correctional officer. He worked there for about 18 months and had to go through 540 hours of training at the Department of Corrections Training Academy. Those hours are equal to over 20 days spent in training. So even if his time there was only a year and a half, he clearly was pretty committed, especially following the fact that he intended college as a major of criminal justice. He then considered becoming a firefighter, but instead chose to start working in construction so he could finance his music career. And because of the persona he wanted to adopt in his rap career, he had to keep his CO past a secret. He started dropping music in the 2000s, but didn't really see too much success until 2006 when he released his debut album, Port of Miami. This album and the single Hustlin' went crazy, and Hustlin' in particular got remixes from Jay-Z and Jeezy. Despite his past, on the song Hustlin', he talked about stuff that at the time people believed, and said things like, "I cut 'em wide, I cut 'em long, I cut 'em fat. I keep 'em coming back. I'm into distribution like I'm Atlantic. I know Pablo, Noriega, the real Noriega. He owed me 100 favors." This album was eventually certified platinum, and just like that, Rick Ross had broken into the music industry. In 2008, he released his next studio album, Trillo, which also did phenomenal. But that same year, the truth about his past was finally revealed. A TMZ adjacent website known as The Smoking Gun posted a photo of a young Rick Ross working in uniform as a correctional officer in a prison. This release took the music world by storm, and in following years, Ross denied the photo's legitimacy multiple times.
Trick Daddy recently accused you of working as a prison guard at one point, Rick. Is there any truth to that?
No, that's not true. But that's disappointing to hear that he said that. He said that?
That's what the question said, yeah.
That's crazy.
Over time, his story started unraveling, with Ross first claiming the photo was faked and created with Photoshop. Then he downgraded to admitting it was real, but he claimed he only worked there so he could understand the other side of the law.
You know what I mean? So we all did a lot of different things to put us all in position. In position, right. And it's not the obvious. So if Rick Ross did work at one of these places, it wasn't for the obvious reason. Right. You know, it's a lot of gold mines around people's faces that people really don't know how to take advantage of. So yeah, me and, you know, we did what we do. You know what I mean? And
nowadays, he finally admits that the photo and its implications are real, but still beats around the bush and gives random reasons as to why he did it.
Were you a correctional officer at one point?
I was, yeah.
So going all the way back, when was that? How long ago?
Maybe when I was 20.
Now, I've talked about this on the channel before, and there are multiple reasons that people have told me why this doesn't matter, and I personally don't care, but I'm sure most of you can assume that the way he was rapping and then this coming out is like, you know, that could kind of bug some people. And the main reason this hurt his credibility is not because he did it, but because he did it and then lied about it. Like, being caught lying about something like this, especially when you got that hard persona, it's not really a good look. And while a lot of Rick Ross's hate actually stems from this, there are multiple more controversies that he's had throughout his career that play into the reasons why people don't like him. In wake of the Officer Ricky photo drop, Ross was grilled in a ton of interviews. One of these interviews was with DJ Vlad. The interview was pretty normal until Vlad began to press Ross with questions surrounding his CO past. Ross tried to dodge the questions and move on, but Vlad continued to push, which resulted in a subsequent rift forming between the two. Along with their personal interactions, Vlad decided to question other people in their interviews on the subject, pushing the narrative further.
Trick Daddy recently accused you of working as a prison guard at one point, Rick. Is there any truth to that?
No, that's not true. That's crazy. It's not true, man, but, you know, dog a sucker, and he mad that, you know, I done came out of nowhere and just, you know, took over the streets like that, you know what I mean?
In response, as DJ Vlad's attorney Brian Kaplan says, Rick Ross orchestrated a brutal attack upon DJ Vlad, carried out at his discretion by his accomplices in retribution for media coverage of Rick Ross's prior life as a correctional officer. So basically, Ross had DJ Vlad jump because he was tired of Vlad talking about his CO past. The beating left Vlad with a cut that had him needing stitches below his eye, 3 facial fractures, a corneal abrasion, and nerve damage. Because of how brutal this attack was, DJ Vlad decided to file a $4 million lawsuit against Rick Ross. In the suit, it states, the attack was launched by Ross in an attempt to stifle Vlad's journalistic reporting and freedom of expression. The suit also said that Ross painstakingly created his public persona to be that of a major drug dealer and gangster, but is in reality a former correctional officer. As a result, Vlad won $300,000 in the court case, but he ended up paying more than that in legal fees, so he definitely took an L. And because Rick Ross did this because he was tired of people bringing up his past and it just seemed like he was trying to hide it even more, it didn't help his image. So everything that made up Ricky Rose's persona at this point seemed to be faked, and you're probably thinking, how could it get any worse? Well, it turns out he wasn't just faking his lifestyle, he was stealing it. This controversy I'm referring to is one of the more well-known ones that Ross was involved in, especially since the other guy involved actually just went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about it. And this is what happened. William Roberts has had a few aliases during his time as a musician, including Teflon Don, Ricky Rose, DeBoss, and more. But obviously he's most commonly known by Rick Ross. However, what many people have come to find out is that his name, just like his story, is also a lie. This is because Rick Ross actually stole his name from the popular drug kingpin Freeway Rick Ross. In the 80s, when Freeway was still on top of the game, he ran a Los Angeles drug empire so large that it supposedly brought in over $1 million a day. With inflation in mind, that's like $5 million a day in today's money, so he was doing pretty good. His story, which was intertwined with CIA conspiracy theories, was so fascinating that Freeway Rick Ross somewhat inspired the main character and story for the FX show Snowfall and its main protagonist, Franklin Saint. A little fun fact for you guys. But despite how popular this story was and how well known it was, Rick Ross didn't care, and he still decided to copy the guy's name.
When the streets had that kind of love for you, the rappers find out. You know, they're some of the first people to find out about that, and he took it and he capitalized on it.
And while for some time he only got a little flack for this since he did grow up around the Miami environment, the thing that many people believe is that Ross was not living or partaking in the activities he now raps about, and that Freeway actually had lived. The real Rick Ross, after getting out of prison, narrowly avoiding a life sentence, eventually decided to file a $10 million lawsuit in 2010 against Ricky Rose for taking his name.
I'd hit him when we was in jail. We talked, and he was supposed to come and see me, and he never did. I wasn't really tripping about that. I got out, start doing my own thing. This lawyer came to me and said, man, Universal owe you $50 million. I said, go get it.
Yeah.
Just like that. That's all it was.
But after an expensive process for both sides, the court leaned towards Officer Ricky based on the First Amendment, and Freeway's criminal past didn't really help him much in the suit either. Along with losing the suit, Freeway said, I owe them $1 million. Got $1 million judgment against me because I had to pay their legal fees. How would you take my name and not have the decency to ask me? He won't even admit that he stole the name. Rick Ross was hardly 4 years into his commercial music career and already had been caught lying about his whole image twice. And it's safe to say that a lot of hip-hop fans were not happy. One fan even said, Ross honestly could have saved so much face by saying, yeah, I may have been a CO, but my life took a different path and now I'm here. But to be honest, at the time, his music was really good. And that's what really matters more at the end of the day. I mean, Wikipedia literally calls the years 2010 to 2013 the prime Rick Ross years. He was dropping songs with huge artists, charting on the regular, was named MTV's hottest MC in the game, and was nominated for BET's Best Male Hip Hop Artist. He also just dropped tons of successful albums, singles, and had a ton of great features. Nowadays, the majority of Ross's most popular songs are either tracks he's featured on or songs from this era. So it's safe to say that despite all the controversy, his music was really good, so people cared more about that. During this era, he also released his 4th studio album, Teflon Don, in 2010. And I want you guys to go ahead and guess what he got in trouble for this time. Yeah, he stole someone else's name too. While technically this is slightly different than the Freeway case, Rick Ross still did get sued again for trademark infringement in 2011. That's because the name of his 2010 album, Teflon Don, was inspired by the mob boss John Gotti's nickname. Teflon Don was also Rick Ross's first name in music before he changed it in the mid-2000s. And the name, like the album, was likely inspired by John Gotti. John Gotti's grandson even spoke out about this in anger against Ricky's use of the name, adding to the list of people who were upset with him for profiting off of someone else's name. Ironically enough though, it wasn't John Gotti's grandson who sued him. Instead it was some guy named Donald Askew Jr., a rapper who went by the name Teflon Don as well, which is pretty funny because he probably copied the name too. The suit was mainly against Rick Ross, but also included DJ Khaled, their label, and anyone else connected to the album. In the suit, Askew claims Ross, as well as other parties involved with the album, infringed on his brand, preventing his growth and success as a rapper. He specifically cites the following misappropriations: trademark infringement, common law trademark rights, trademark delusion, unfair competition, tortious interference, I don't know how you say that, to be honest, fraud, and even identity theft. Teflon Don is quoted saying, I'm building a name, I'm building a brand, and for someone to come with an album and an alias the name Teflon Don, and they have big budgets to put behind it, it blocks me from progressing. I was climbing the ladder and it feels like I went straight downhill, and I don't feel like that's fair. Teflon Don also had claimed that he was connected with DJ Khaled and Rick Ross back in 2007. His proof for this is because on the song I Represent by DJ Khaled, he says, to my homie Teflon Don, we the best. Although he definitely could have been referring to Rick Ross, so I don't really know if that's good evidence or not. Teflon Don also said, it is almost belittling to me because the music he, Rick Ross, puts out is almost demeaning and the music that I put out is more positive. We have two different crowds and it is making me lose clientele based on the fact that they think I am a negative rapper. So when they hear that Teflon Don wants to perform at a certain place, sometimes they think negative, and that was not the brand that I was building all these years. Regardless, how the lawsuit ended has pretty much no information online, so I'm not quite sure how that all went, but I can't assume it went well for either party. Actually, it's more likely it was dismissed because that's kind of silly. But Rick Ross definitely wasn't done with controversy, as shortly after this he made one of the biggest mistakes of his career. While the previously covered controversy revolved heavily around fraud, this one strays away and nearly could have ended Ross's career entirely with the traction that it caught. I'm talking about a lyric that Rick Ross chose to include on his verse on the song Uoeno by Rocco with Future. The song itself actually did pretty well commercially and spawned multiple remixes including big names like Wiz Khalifa, A$AP Rocky, 2 Chainz, Lil Wayne, and more. But what stood out to many in the song was when Rick Ross said, put Molly in her champagne, she ain't even know it. I took her home and enjoyed that, she ain't even know it. With this line, Officer Ricky took an odd and pretty dark approach at the meaning of the song's name you don't even know. It's especially surprising that Rose dropped this line at the near peak of his career without anyone at all stepping in around him and saying, hey man, maybe you shouldn't say that. Public reaction to the lyric obviously was extremely negative, which could have easily been expected, and it even resulted in some funny consequences for Rick Ross. In the line directly before that, Rick says, I'll die over these Reeboks, you don't even know it, referring to his brand deal with Reebok. Ironically enough though, angry listeners used this against him and presented a petition with around 72,000 signatures to Reebok demanding that they cut ties with Rose, to which they obliged and cut ties with the rapper. Putting a brand tag before a date rape line is insane. Along with losing the deal as a result of the line, he also had multiple shows canceled in wake and was forced to put out an apology on Twitter in hopes of saving the Reebok deal, which almost no one accepted. He said in an interview, there's certain things you can't tweet. I want to make sure this is clear. That woman is the most precious gift known to man. You understand? It was a misunderstanding with a lyric, a misinterpretation where the term rape wasn't used. I would never use the term rape. We don't condone rape, and I'm not with that. But if we're being honest here, he kind of moved the goalpost over because no one said he used that word. He was just kind of implying it.
Because of the implication.
Oh. It got to the point where his verse was removed from radio play, and in a remix of the song, Schoolboy Q alluded to the line by saying, Molly in her drink, but she asked me to, and oh yeah, I got this on cam. Overall, this only made things worse for Ross and his fabricated image, because now instead of just being the guy who lied about his entire image, he was also labeled as the date rape rapper. It seemed like his controversies were affecting his career by this point, as everything released after this incident wasn't performing as well as his projects before, which had all reached platinum or gold. And even years later, this incident still haunts him, like when 50 Cent recently brought up the line on social media, connecting it to the recent Diddy allegations. Speaking of 50 Cent, him and Rick Ross, as I'm sure many of you know, have had an extensive history of beef throughout their careers, which also hasn't really been too great for Ricky's reputation. It all allegedly started when 50 gave Ross a so-called disgusted look at the BET Awards. This small moment turned into a bunch of disses back and forth and a huge beef in which 50 Cent coined the name Officer Ricky for the former CEO Rick Ross. 50 mostly jokes on Ross's fake persona, which has left a lot of fans struggling to take Ricky Rose seriously.
Is there anything about Ross and his career that you have any respect for?
Oh, no, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. I never wanted to work with him.
And while 50 has had plenty of beefs over the years, as I'm sure you guys know, I think he's put the most effort into this one. He, along with many fans, hated Rick so much that in a comically creative fashion, 50 created an entire short cartoon series called Officer Ricky. The series wasn't the highest quality, but it does feature multiple episodes and it's absolutely hilarious.
Officer Ricky? Damn, Rick. Why you got me up in this man? Is it because I said you and your mama look like the clumps? Well, y'all is some ugly mother.
On top of this, when Ross was allegedly a victim of a drive-by shooting at 5 a.m., 50 continued to push the fraud narrative, claiming that the shooting, which resulted in Ross crashing his car into a building, was actually fake. 50 tweeted hours after the incident, "Ha ha ha, fat boy hit the building. LOL, it looks staged to me. No holes in the car." And he said, "Ha ha ha, that boy was spooked. I ride like Obama. Level 6 bulletproof, bomb-proof, you already know." I could go on for a long time about their beef, but that's not the main highlight of this video. But 50's done things like leaked an alleged sex tape of Ross's baby mama, mocked him on social media when he was hospitalized after being found unresponsive due to seizures, which is pretty crazy to do, let's be honest. And he pretty much called him stupid again after his decisions that got him and his crew jumped in Canada, which we will get more into in another section. Ross has tried to clap back here and there by saying things like 50 Cent's broke.
Charlemagne referred to 50 Cent as a diabolical genius. And a diabolical genius doesn't file foreclosure, doesn't file bankruptcy, It's not a diabolical genius, a diabolical genius making big boy moves.
But the public tends to side with 50 as one. 50's, iconic. He's really funny. And Ross is a liar, so people don't take him very seriously. However, the public's issue with Ross doesn't just stem from lighthearted or fraudulent problems. On top of all of this, he had another controversial and violent incident that was not a good look. What happened was, while Rose wasn't home, 2 of his groundskeepers were having a party at his house without his permission. When he eventually got home and discovered this, Ross and his 2 bodyguards forced the 2 groundskeepers into the guest house. While in the house, Ross aimed a gun at the groundskeepers and even allegedly pistol whipped whipped one of them, forbidding them to leave. Rick tried to claim self-defense in an attempt to avoid prosecution, but it failed.
Rick Ross and manager Adrian James left a Fayette County courtroom early Friday afternoon. They'll return next month in hopes of proving Ross pistol whipped groundskeepers out of self-defense. Ross, whose real name is William Roberts, also had support from industry friend DJ Khaled in the courtroom.
So as a result, Ross pleaded no contest to 5 charges, including those listed above, as well as an additional 2 counts of pointing a pistol at another person and possession of marijuana. As punishment, Rick was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, which after doing so erased this conviction from his record since he was being sentenced as a first-time felony offender, which is kind of funny, you know, given everything else we've talked about. And he was also given 60 months of probation, which throughout Ross was not able to have any contact with the victims or be in possession of drugs, alcohol, or firearms. They even made him take anger management courses, which is pretty funny. And you're probably thinking, how could it get any worse? Well, Rick Ross has had a few more controversies. When Rick Ross was on The Breakfast Club, he was asked about the lack of women signed to his record label, in which he responded, "You know, I never did it because I always thought like I would end up fucking the female rapper and fucking the business up." He also said, "I'm so focused on my business, I just gotta be honest with you. You know, she looking good, I'm spending so much money on her photo shoots, I gotta fuck a couple times." This line, along with him hitting on Angela Yee throughout the entire episode, really upset a bunch of listeners, creating an outrage on social media.
Okay, so I have another question. You won't mind me asking?
Go ahead.
You don't mind?
No, I'm a lip service person, so.
Okay, I like the way that sounds. But are you a squirter?
No.
You're not?
Mm-mm.
So again, he tried to apologize. He said, "I want to address an insensitive comment I made on a very sensitive issue. My entire empire's backbone is led by 2 of the strongest people I know, and they happen to be women, my mother and sister. The operations wouldn't run without them, and I have the highest regard and respect for women in this industry. I have a daughter myself, my most cherished gift in the world." But the public received his message regardless with a mixed response, which many thought was disingenuous because he plugged his new show at the end of his apology. This event wasn't as harmful to his career as many of the other ones I've covered, but this coupled with the "you don't even know" thing was definitely kind of like a pattern that definitely upset some people. And while it seems like Officer Ricky has been hated from every angle in every way for every reason, he wasn't physically confronted for his decisions until recently. Besides a few brief disagreements, Drake and Rick Ross have appeared to be friends for some time now with a ton of collabs. Most recently, Ross said in 2023 on Drink Champs that him and Drake are very close. Everyone thought that Drake and Rick Ross were cool until the album We Don't Trust You came out by Future and Metro Boomin. As I'm sure you all know, this album featured the track Like That, in which Kendrick dissed Drake. And as people started investigating, they realized that the entire album was basically a diss at Drake from Future and Metro. And guess who else was featured on this album? Rick Ross. Now, Rick Ross wasn't actually dissing Drake on this album, but it seems him even associating with the two was enough to light the fire. After a few subtle jabs were thrown by Drake, including a special concert invite to Ross's ex, the beef was confirmed after Drake's song Push Ups leaked, and it included multiple bars dissing Rick Ross's CO past, his age, his finances, and more. Drake didn't ton a spend of time on Rick Ross, but Rick Ross decided to respond with a full-length diss track piling on to the entire rap civil war, which I covered. You know, shameless plug. They continued to go back and forth on Instagram stories, dissing each other, talking about who had the biggest house and who was trippy off the Moonjaro and whatnot. And in general, it was pretty funny.
White boy, you got a Chevy, white boy? I doubt it. But anyway, big nose. Big nose. Boy, you had 25% body fat with a carved out 6-piece. Stop. We know what time it is. That shit costs 40 bands.
As time passed, Ross continued to parade against Drake, which led us to the Ignite Music Festival in Vancouver. At around 10:30 p.m., directly after Ross concluded his set and was making his way off the main stage, a little squabble occurred. In a video of the scuffle, Kendrick's Not Like Us can be heard playing in the background, which has led many to believe that this was the reason that festival goers attacked Ross and his crew. During the mix-up, Officer Ricky was sucker punched, his security was beaten up while keeping the crowd back, and even one of his crew members was getting knocked out cold in a ragdoll fashion. Rick shook off the event, posting online about how he enjoyed his time in Canada. Then his arch nemesis 50 decided to jump in, joking about Ross's great escape after getting jumped. So all of these controversies seem to have resulted in a widespread disdain for Rick Ross. On Reddit, one person wrote, Why do so many people hate Rick Ross? As a Miami native, we always looked at Ross with such esteem. I just want to know what it is that non-South Florida people hate about Ross so much. People responded with comments like, "Who are you talking about? The real Rick Ross or Officer Ricky?" His lyric about drugging a woman's drink and f***ing her was pretty gross. But I think the comment that sums it up the best is this one. He's the living embodiment of fake it till you make it. He well and truly made it, but still completely disrespected the man he stole the name and persona from. Overall, Rick Ross has clearly pushed through the hate in spite of his recurring mistakes by becoming a household name, accomplishing major feats in the industry that many people will dream of, and he made a ton of money along the way. Love him or hate him, the boss has undeniably left his mark on hip-hop, even with the many road bumps along the way. One comment sums it up perfectly when they said, "I see nothing but hate on Rick Ross's YouTube videos, but at the same time I see Ross living in a 200-acre estate with Ray J swimming pools. I say that to say either he's doing something right or the haters are doing something wrong."